in particular the construction industry, we keep chiming about how innovative we are, and we got to face facts and realize that the newcomers coming in from Western countries in particular, the likes of London or Paris or Sydney, they're typically 5-10 years ahead of the local talent. So we should be embracing that global innovation and trying to harness it.
Welcome to the Canadian Dream Podcast. Today, I have a special guest from Ireland who came to Canada about 15 years ago, and he is the founder of Moving to Canada and Outpost Recruitment. I'm here with Rory. Rory, right? How do you pronounce your name?
Rory.
Rory.
You nailed it.
What brought you to Canada 15 years ago?
I'd spent a summer here in 2005, just during my studies. I had a great experience in Toronto. And then in 2007, I was working in Dublin. I was working in financial services. I kind of switched from a few jobs, trying to find my feet in finance, not necessarily enjoying it. And a friend of mine was interviewing with a Canadian company who had a European office in Dublin. So I'd helped her through the process. I learned a little bit about the company, even to the point where I had to draw on a map where Vancouver was on the back of a presentation I still have at home. She got the job with the Canadian company. About 6 months later, they were hiring again. She encouraged me to apply. I got a common friend of ours to apply against me. Long story short, my friend ended up getting the job in Dublin, but as they were assessing the two of us, one of them suggested if only one of them would move to Canada. So Dawn, my guardian angel, suggested that I would be more than willing to leave Ireland. And in February 2008, I moved to Vancouver.
So it wasn't in your plans before that to move to Canada?
No, never had any plans. Just a good experience in the summer I spent in Toronto.
But you were willing to move from Ireland. So why would you move out of Ireland?
I was always very curious. I guess growing up as a teenager, two of my brothers were living in Australia. I also grew up in hospitality. So my parents, for 50 years, they were running a bed and breakfast or a guest house in the southwest of Ireland. So I grew up with tourism, surrounded by people from different countries. So I was always very curious to go and explore the world as soon as possible. I figured after my studies was a little bit too soon. So my long-term plan was to gain 2 or 3 years of experience and then to travel. So I'd been in Dublin about 2 years at that point, gaining experience. I wasn't very happy in finance, but the opportunity to work in finance in Vancouver came about. And I didn't hesitate. It was just a perfect opportunity to start my life here.
That was indeed a very good opportunity because most immigrants come looking for a job. You already had a job even before you landed here.
Yeah, everyone postures that. They always assume that if you're working with newcomers that you must have had a difficult journey.
Yeah.
That journey made you resilient and then you vowed to help everyone else. So it was actually quite the opposite for me. So I moved here. I had a month, all expenses paid for. We had a hotel downtown, all of my meal expenses. Then my work permit was processed, so I was sponsored by the company, so I didn't have to go through any immigration process myself. Then they put me through PR. I just had to sign the papers and give them a required information. So my journey was very different to the typical immigrant journey in Canada, but I was very grateful for it. What opened my eyes, I guess, to the struggles of newcomers was actually the experiences of my friends. I guess I probably did well in terms of having empathy for people because their problems became my problems. And I realized every year in Vancouver, 2008, 9, 10, every year we're making new friends because friends would arrive, they couldn't figure out how to stay here, and then they would just leave. They couldn't figure out their career or just couldn't figure out how to make things work. So that really got me thinking about, what are the success factors of newcomers? I was trying to figure out, what makes some newcomers very successful and some are not. And I realized one of the critical aspects of that is just access to information or being able to plan. And that was something that that was a problem that we wanted to solve through moving to Canada.
When you say we, did you have someone else helping you out at this stage before you founded a company?
No, I suppose I say we. I suppose it was probably, I said
Now
the
you're a
team.
team.
Yeah,
You were
exactly.
a team
Now
of
the
what,
team,
10 people?
10 people, yes. So at the time, it was
But
just
the
it
idea
was just
started
me.
with you only.
Exactly. So it was just me trying to solve it, and I should say I back then, but it's definitely a we now, right? Because my team have made us so strong over the years. But I guess the concern for me was I knew I needed to get out of finance. I moved to Canada not with a clear dream in Canada. I moved to Canada by chance, but as I enjoyed life in Vancouver, North Americans are very positive, very proactive around chasing their career goals. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that my long-term career is not in finance. It's not in an office either. My vision was to work remotely, to have more time in Ireland, to have more time in Canada, and to have more time exploring the rest of the world.
Do you have that now? Do you go to Ireland often?
Yes, I typically spend 4 to 6 weeks in Ireland every year because my parents' family have lots of nieces and nephews. I love to be able to stay connected to them, as in I was very lucky when I was working in finance. They used to actually send me back to Dublin to help out. So I got very lucky that I was going back regularly, and I think I got into that habit. And I think I realized that I think a lot of newcomers, you feel very disconnected from your home country. And I realized that that was something that was important to me, to have freedom of kind of time and location, and to actually have that time to, I used the word service, your friends and family that you grew up with, right? Because that's always the choice we make. We kind of choose home or we choose away, right? And that can be a very difficult choice for newcomers. So I was a little bit greedy. I wanted to be able to enjoy both lives.
How was it for you to start the company? Did you start it as a side hustle or did you go all in at the beginning?
It was very much a side hustle, as in the original incarnation of moving to Canada. It was a Facebook page called Moving to Vancouver. I remember starting it I think it was around, it was early 2011. I was working in finance at the time, but I was just carving out every hour I could in the evening or by day, my lunch or mornings, and just trying to test out the idea that there was a need for independent, objective information. The Facebook page went pretty well.
What did you have on the Facebook page?
It was basic HTML notes. There used to be a notes section on a Facebook group back then, and I actually created. So we didn't even have a website. It was just simple HTML notes. I was learning how to create HTML code and how to link to other resources, and I was just putting all the key information together. So one of the things that really stirred the idea for me was when I moved in 2008, the global economy was in crisis, right, by September that same year. So the Lehman's collapse, so the global financial crisis started. Ireland was hit particularly hard by the crisis. So between 2009 and 2011, I got so many emails from Irish people saying, I don't know you, but I'm a friend of this person, or I'm a friend of your cousin. They suggested you're in Vancouver, and it was all the same requests. It was like, how do I get there? What's it like to work in this industry? What's a good time of year to move? And then is there job opportunities? Because in Ireland, house prices dropped by 50% in 2 years after the crisis. So a lot of people had to immigrate from Ireland. We have a long history with immigration in Ireland, but during those years of austerity measures, it was particularly bleak. So I was in Canada enjoying my life, and then suddenly people were saying, hey, I need to get out of Ireland. Can you help me? So that really got my brain thinking about the need for information, and I was thinking about success factors, and then I was like pondering all of these ideas and linking these things together and to create a resource where people could plan, execute, and plan research and kind of execute their entire move, right?
So first it was a sort of philanthropic work, right? With moving to Canada. There's a Facebook page, but did you start the recruitment company at the same time?
Yes, the recruitment idea was always there because I was also studying the long-term labor shortages in Canada. They kept talking about we need this amount of engineers, or the oil and gas sector is screaming out for people. And like at the same time, the Irish construction industry stopped. literally around 2008, 2009, it just stopped. They stopped, all building construction stopped. So at a time where Canada needed construction engineers, I was looking at observing this, and I realized my brother is an engineer. He followed me to Canada in 2010. And then I was also watching Canadian companies recruit from Ireland. So I was like, this idea is so obvious right now that somebody has to execute on it. So I just wanted it to be me, because I realized that a recruitment fair is a very kind of quick process. You kind of it's quick and costly. But I wanted to be an always-on resource for major Canadian companies to help them identify global talent before they arrive in Canada. I'd never worked in construction or recruitment. I pondered working for a major agency, and then I just realized that doing that 6 or 12 months just doesn't align with what I want to do. I was so desperate to get out of the office environment. I just wanted to learn skills quickly. I wasn't afraid to jump into deep end. Before or while I was working in finance, I transitioned my career to sales. I learned I was working in a software company. I got curious about creating websites. So I just got curious about a lot of these areas. And when two of my brothers were engineers, I was always curious about construction. I loved major construction, in particular, building local projects like the Broadway SkyTrain or major highways. And so I was always very curious about how that worked. And I guess my bet was that I could learn construction quicker than I could go broke. So I saved $30,000 at the time. I figured that would get me through about 4 or 5 months in Vancouver, and then I just had to figure out how to make money.
And then you quit.
Exactly. In July 2012, I quit finance. I had no other income at the time, but I just figured between moving to Canada, which would be a slow kind of building an audience of newcomers, I knew that over time, if I was able to get tens of thousands of newcomers, that maybe there was advertising opportunities, right? Because newcomer marketing is the kind of sector we're in there. But then with construction, I knew that there's a short-term need. There's an immediate need for people. So one of my first clients was, it was a local construction company. They were traveling to Dublin for this careers fair, trying to hire in Ireland and the UK. And then he said, look, we'll take people now if you have them. So I started looking for people through my network. And I delivered a few candidates to that guy, and that was my first client. So that gave me the belief. And then from there on, it's just continually learning. I really loved, to me, recruitment is sales. And sales is really easy unless you're forceful. Everyone remembers a forceful sales guy or being sold something you didn't want or being lied to. But sales is really easy if you're truthful and ethical about how you communicate. And it's about finding a clear need and guiding somebody through the process. So when I looked at recruitment, I realized this industry is so broken. I saw there's an opportunity here for somebody who comes in, if they have a unique source of talent, which I kind of figured I'm going to focus on international talent. And if you just focus on learning and providing value to your clients, you can build a solid long-term business.
What is your process like? Just give me an idea for the layman who doesn't know what a recruitment company does. How long does it take, for example, for someone who is actually looking for a job or starting to look for a job to being hired?
It can vary hugely, because if you're in international recruitment, a long timeline is 2 years. And for a short one could be perhaps 2 weeks, to get somebody through a cycle. I only focus on construction professionals, so typically they're kind of degree educated. So the process is a little bit longer for professionals than it would be, saying, hiring a tradesperson, right?
So where does the demand come first from? From workers who are looking for jobs, or from companies who are coming to you, hey, we have these jobs and we're looking for people?
So traditionally, when people think of recruiters, they think of headhunters. A headhunter is very much demand focused. So he's getting what they call a requisition. So a construction company is saying, hey, we need a project manager. We need a project manager who can do high-rise construction. They must have 5 years of experience. They must be willing to work for this salary, and they have a degree in engineering. So that becomes looking for a needle in a haystack. So that's the traditional headhunt model. What I started off by doing was I was very focused on being candidate driven. So my goal was to, through moving to Canada, to identify quality international candidates, to work with them through the process of choosing a location in Canada, choosing the suitable role for them in Canada, identifying a list of companies. Then I would present them to the companies, and then invariably they would chat with a few companies, and there would be a few companies interested. So the timeline could vary hugely depending on how soon they're arriving. But if they're like, one of the things I do complain about in general is recruitment's so slow here. We talk about having a labor shortage in Canada, but the one thing we haven't innovated on is recruitment. It's so slow.
And why is it slow?
It's decision by jury. Nobody wants to make decisions in this country. That's why I find immigrants can do very well, because we can be more fast-paced and kind of deciding, okay...
Sorry, who cannot make decisions?
Like hiring managers.
Companies.
Hiring managers.
So the hiring process is slow. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you experienced this, but most immigrants have experienced a never-ending recruitment process where they meet a company 3 or 4 times, and then someone says, oh, we're not too sure. Can we check back with you in a week? Or we'll follow up in a month. And it's like they seem to be very unsure of themselves when making decisions. And it's like, a hiring manager is paid to make a decision. So it's like hiring the first time every time, if you get what I mean. It's like, it's okay if it's a new role for the company, but sometimes you're like, you hire this role every week. You should know when it's a good time. So one of the things I would love to see, it would really help newcomers, is companies being more open about what the process is, or outlining what the process is, right? I've never had a company...
Before you hire, knowing how many stages... Exactly. Oh.
I've never ever had a company plan a second interview before the first. Because, like, obviously you schedule the first interview, but if I was interested in hiring you today, Elton, I would say, let's have coffee today, and then I would schedule, if my calendar is busy, I would schedule my calendar to make time for meeting you a second time, right? But it's always just, let's meet him, let's give it a day or two because everyone's busy. We need to have a chat about what we think of the person. Then it's like, oh, we want to meet him again, but everyone's busy for the next few days, so we need to push it out again. So it's a very open-ended process, which doesn't really help when you're in a labor shortage. I think Canadian employers can be their own worst enemies, and I think a lot of newcomers can probably attest to that, because... We get into processes, Canadian employers get into processes, and they don't know what the end is or what the deadline is or what the outcome is. And invariably it goes, okay, let's pass the buck. Let's have them chat with the CEO, or let's have them have a chat with this, or let's give ourselves more time, right? So I wish for me it was much quicker. The process for hiring people would be very quick if it was up to me, but it typically goes with the client in particular, right? How strong the need is. And I suppose how strong the candidate is, right?
And are there any tips, or is there any sort of training that you offer to your clients to increase the likelihood that they will get the job they want?
We have a lot of open source tools or blogs essentially on my on Outpost Recruitment website. They can refer to that. There's everything from interview preparation, updating your LinkedIn profile, understanding about the projects, understanding the difference between Canadian job titles and other international ones. Our service is a kind of concierge service to the candidate, and then we get paid by the employer. So that's why I like that business model.
And you have been doing this for years.
Yes, so about 11 years now.
So you must have worked with thousands of people looking for jobs.
Definitely.
Right?
Yeah, one of the things I notice with newcomers is they tend to be a job taker rather than a job maker, right? They kind of come here and they feel that I have to take any job, right? But the world is what you make it. If you come here with a clear vision and you've done your research and you tell people this is the job and this is why I'm qualified to do it, and here are examples of why, you can do a lot better. So I find a lot of newcomers and say I find it very off-putting as a recruiter when somebody contacts me and says I'm willing to do anything, right? Nobody needs a generalist, right? Most people need a specialist. It's great at the start of your career to be very open to opportunities and things like that. But I think when you've gained experience, the key advice I give to newcomers is figure out what your strengths are. Talk to your former boss or talk to your colleagues and really zone in on what you're good at instead of trying to be generic and trying to load your resume with keywords for a applicant tracking system. Or a lot of people they're afraid to leave something out, but I really ask people to focus on results. Give me the evidence of you being good at a skill instead of listing the skill. People talk about, they'll say, I'm a excellent communicator, great leadership skills, scheduling. I'm like, give me an example. Give me an example of when you applied leadership. That's a lot more powerful than putting leadership and an asterisk next to it on the top of your resume, right?
And is it safe to assume that the Canadian experience might be one of the biggest challenges that everybody faces when they come to Canada?
100%.
Or the lack of it?
The lack of it, yeah.
What is the Canadian experience?
I could talk for hours on this topic. I'm trying to be succinct now and put all of my thoughts on it.
Is it safe to say that I feel some sarcasm coming from you, or are you tired of talking about the Canadian experience?
Oh, I talk about it a lot because I always ask employers and like, why is so first things first, I would say is Canada is not a very innovative country in general, okay? We still use checks here. IRCC got rid of facsimile in the last 3 months. So like, we're very far behind. A lot of, in construction sector or in other areas, we get a lot of our ideas from Europe primarily. That's not to say that great ideas can't come from anywhere else, but the fact is that a lot of the new ideas come from outside of Canada. So we're a slow adopter. Having a flawed obsession with local experience, when you're a slow adopter, is making a decision against innovation. Because you either do things the old way or you innovate. And this obsession with local experience is basically saying we do not want to innovate. So my challenge, I guess, in Canada is I go to conferences across different sectors and things like that, but we always chime about how innovative we are, but nobody faces facts and said, no, we're actually falling behind. And the big problem we have, and this applies to individuals as well, if you think you're the best at something, how do you improve? You need to get rid of ego, and you need to assess yourself very candidly and say, okay, I can get better. We can all get better at everything. But what I find in the industry, in particular the construction industry, we keep chiming about how innovative we are. And we got to face facts and realize that the newcomers coming in from Western countries in particular, the likes of London or Paris or Sydney, they're coming in and they're typically 5-10 years ahead of the local talent. So we should be embracing that global innovation and trying to harness it. But instead, employers across all sectors, they obsess about how long it will take you to teach how to do things our way. Instead of saying, here's the problem, what way would you solve this problem? This is how we would do it, and then finding the best way, right? So it really stifles Canada's productivity, the fact that we have a flawed obsession. When I'm dealing with newcomers, I always tell them, you have to play the game. You have to acknowledge that it's important to them. You ask questions around the training that you're going to get. You acknowledge that there are different standards in your industry, or there's different contracts, or you understand what's different, and you need to speak directly to your understanding of that problem and your need to adapt, because everyone needs to adapt. It doesn't matter. When I make that point about flawed obsession with Canadian experience, Canadians often interpret it as I'm saying that international people are better. It's not about that. We can't compare saying one is better than the others. We have to say is solving the problem the best way is the end goal, not doing it one way or another. You need to find out, and maybe it's a combination of both outlooks, right? So I always encourage people to be, when you're dealing with a newcomer, start asking them, what are your thoughts here? Because when we come in from different countries, we come in with different ideas, different procedures, different processes. But the critical thing is that we can convince a Canadian employer that we're dedicated to understanding their process first. But from that point, we need to be a little bit more open, right? I just find in Canada that it's the Canadian way or nothing, right? And if you don't play that game, that they just don't want to hire you, right? I've often had candidates saying, if that company is so obsessed with local experience, they're not the right choice for me. And that's how a lot of people look at things, right? If I ever met an employer and they said, we're never going to change, would you be attracted to them, right? So it's trying to apply that to whatever sector you're in. And don't get me wrong, Canadians are innovative in many ways. I think in med tech in particular and pharmaceuticals, there's a lot of innovation going on. But in construction, I find they're particularly far behind and there's a lot of room for improvement. But yet they continue to talk about the importance of local experience.
In construction, who is in the forefront in the world? Is it Europe? Is it Asia?
If you looked at kind of the top construction companies around the world, a lot of them tend to be European, but I can definitely say with confidence that Asia brings a lot of innovation because they have I suppose, a culture of innovation, trying new things, not saying, hey, you're not from here, you don't understand how things work around here, right? So that's the problem in Canada. Like there are employers here that I work for and that are starting to get more open in terms of how they hire newcomers, and they're innovating because of a result of just taking off the shackles and actually bringing people in and saying, hey, you're from Egypt, you're from Australia, you're from Iran. Here's the problem. 3 of you guys, you sit down and figure it out. I'll tell you how we normally do it, but you tell me what the solution is. And then you compare the two approaches and you go, oh, actually, we can learn from this. And then you adopt 1 or 2 tweaks to the Canadian way. And that's what innovation is. It's just getting over that fear of change.
Can you give me an example of how outdated our construction industry is in Canada?
An example of Canada falling behind, I would say, is formwork systems for concrete, right? So a formwork system is basically creating a mold for concrete for high-rise buildings or any structure. Up until quite recently, Canada was using timber because timber was very cheap and they were using hammer and nails and carpenters to build these forms. So around the world, there's particular formwork systems. They're either using, PVC plastic or some kind of molds and they're reusable. And then they're working with that. So rather than working with timber and nails, there's a lot of examples as you go on, as in, one of the ones it's more technical one, but like design, build, construction, delivery is kind of considered a standard kind of vanilla project delivery around the world. What that means is that the design and the construction are kind of ongoing iteratively, and you can continue to change the design even in the early stages of construction. In Canada, it's very much design, bid, build. So you complete design, you then find a bidder, and then you build it only according to design. So what that means is if the builder has a great idea about how this could be done better, they're not really interested in hearing it. So sometimes they can try, but if you have an iterative process like design build, which is used more commonly around the world, that allows for, it's just adapting to the change, right? So people are continually working and realizing that things may change for the better as you get through the project.
Let's talk a little bit more about your journey as an entrepreneur. You mentioned before this chat that an entrepreneur should be used to being a hustler all the time. What was that with your own words?
Yeah, I suppose what happens is in the day of like technology unicorns and stuff like this is, and everyone thinks that it's like, 2 or 3 years or maybe even 4 years is a hard slog, and then suddenly you achieve it and then you have financial security for the rest of your life. Entrepreneurship gets romanticized, of course, but I think the whole idea is some people get in it for the wrong reasons, and I think you have to be just prepared to hustle. It's just a constant state of hustle, because as soon as you achieve your goals, you set higher standards, right? And it's just this constant state of, to say discontent means we're continually discontent, and I don't mean that, but you have a discontent with the status quo, that you continually want to improve the status quo is probably the best way of describing it.
For most people who are applying or who are coming to Canada, they come to moving to Canada. What sorts of dreams do you usually see people having?
Oh, your dreams can vary hugely, right? Because we always, depending on the demographic, a huge proportion of immigrants to Canada are coming here for peace and stability, right? We've a high proportion of refugees. We've a very high proportion of permanent residents that are simply moving from developing countries to create better opportunity for themselves, or even just coming from unstable countries, right? Touching on that as well, you've economic class, right? That's typically just looking for better opportunities for yourself, but also their kids, right? Which is amazing, right? I love when I meet an immigrant and it says, look, I'm actually immigrating for this girl. And then they come in on the video conference and I meet the daughter, and you kind of realize, wow, somebody with a kind of a 20-year vision, right? But then I find Western countries, we typically immigrate for lifestyle reasons. You know, we come for, we kind of come to try places out, and sometimes we stay and sometimes we don't. So it's really across the spectrum, depending on some people, you know, peace, stability, economic immigrants, and then you're looking at just lifestyle immigrants, people that just want to try living in another place, or they simply just want to travel, work and travel for a short period and then fall in love with Canada.
At moving to Canada, you not only help people find out what they have to do in order to find a job and to immigrate, but it also help them find the best location for them to move to. How different is British Columbia compared to Toronto or Ontario or Ottawa or Quebec or Nova Scotia, etc.?
It's hugely diverse, right? We're in the second biggest country in the world. The climates vary, the people vary, the political views vary. Once relocated a Polish citizen from Ireland to the Northwest Territories. I had a role came up in the Northwest Territories, and I chatted to this guy, and he said, "Oh, it's always been my dream to live near the Arctic." And like when you make things like that happen, and then he explained to me how in the Northwest Territories, they look at BC as the California of Canada. So having that perspective, right? When we're in Vancouver, we kind of have this very different perspective. It's very multicultural. It's very liberal here. But you go an hour east, it changes drastically, right? As in it's very religious. It becomes more conservative. Rural BC is very, very different to Vancouver in terms of how people look, the level of diversity. So there's so many changes. As in BC is the size of France, right? To put it in perspective. There's 65 million people in France, and there's 4 million people in BC. So there's nobody here. And then you go across and you realize how vast this country is and how many different kind of ways of living there are, because sadly, a lot of immigrants go towards the urban centers. I think that's kind of people playing the numbers game. They said there are more jobs in Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal. Therefore, I have a better chance of getting a job in one of those cities. Where I like to encourage people to say, well, why don't you choose where you want to live and make it your business to find a job in that location, right? Right now, I would probably say, maybe 40-50% of newcomers want to be in the GTA or Vancouver. But the cost of living here, the quality of life, it can be much, much better elsewhere, especially for people immigrating with families. Mm-hmm. Cities are a young people's game, right? And I think people, newcomers especially, want to be more open to kind of regional locations or looking at smaller cities, because there's a huge diversity. Places like Ottawa, Victoria, Kelowna, these are all great cities that can offer a lot better affordability, but just a very different Canada to looking at the major urban centers.
Yeah, I was going to ask if there are any hidden gems. You mentioned Victoria, Kelowna, or Ottawa. Do you know Salmon Arm?
Yes.
Or Merritt? These are the little towns that have, or whose populations have increased the most in the past few years. Do you know any other small places that are actually booming for immigrants?
There's so many. I think, like Squamish, even on the Sea to Sky corridor, right? Obviously, Whistler is very famous, but Squamish and Pemberton are increasing at a huge rate as well. And there's a lot of beautiful regional towns in BC that, a lot of people are immigrating from smaller towns themselves. So immigrating from a small town to a major urban city is potentially a mistake for a lot of immigrants, right? And that can lead to huge culture shock, where if you're living in a small town and you have a family life, maybe it's better to identify a small town feel rather than culture shock yourself too much, right?
We're talking a lot about British Columbia, but do you actually work with people and help them settle in other areas?
Yes,
Canada?
all across Canada.
Yeah.
So our team is remote based, so they're dispersed across. We have people in Ontario, Quebec, BC, Alberta. So we 4 of the provinces covered, but there's so many other locations even beyond that, right?
So in a few words, how, if you could describe these 4 locations, how would you describe Toronto, Quebec, Alberta, and Vancouver/British Columbia?
Ooh, it's tough to describe the province, right? Because the province and the main city are very different, right?
But lifestyle or the type of people that tend to choose those different locations, is there any commonality? For example, I always found Toronto way more business oriented. I always thought, wow, if I moved from Vancouver to Toronto, my business will thrive much faster, will grow much faster.
Interesting.
Don't you find Vancouver too small in many ways? Very cliquey.
But I suppose what the beauty of, like, if I had to describe BC, I would just say it's all about the outdoors, right? As in,
you know, lifestyle.
Yeah, the part when I see somebody move to BC and they say I'm moving from a city in India with 30 million people, and I'm like, I don't like the outdoors or I don't like hiking. I'm like, just go to Toronto or go to Montreal, because Vancouver is not very good at being a city. It's a great base for exploring the outdoors, but it's not a very vibrant city. It's not a very, it's a little bit sterile as a city, right? It's beautiful, it's clean, and it's diverse, but it's not a very vibrant city when you compare it to Toronto or Montreal, for the example, or great cities around the world, right?
Great. Now moving to Alberta, our next door province. How are Edmonton and Calgary?
I would say Alberta is for people, it tends to be more conservative, and it's people that like having space. There's a lot of space there. I know you can get space in BC as well, but I think a lot of people live coastally in BC, right? But I think in Alberta, it's just a lot of space. It's quite business friendly, but a lot of Alberta is really, it's a resource province, right? As much as they're trying to diversify away from resources, but it's very, very focused on resources. So Albertans have very different views on global warming than the typical person in Vancouver, for example, right?
How about Toronto and Ontario in general?
I will always describe Toronto as, and I mean this affectionately, I guess I would call it a poor man's New York. It's the big city in Vancouver, or in Canada. If you are a city person, if you're moving from a large city anywhere around the world and you love urban life, I would always recommend Toronto. You know, it's 6 million people in the GTA. There's as much concrete as you can see. A lot of people love that. Everyone's very different, right? I love the concept of being close to the outdoors. I put up with the bad parts of Vancouver because of the location, where there's a lot going on in Toronto. There's very unique neighborhoods. It's a lot more multicultural. I always describe Vancouver as very European and very Asian, where Toronto is a lot more diverse in terms of Africa and South America being represented as well. And then moving on, I guess Quebec is, to me, Montreal is probably the most vibrant city in Canada. It's very unique. It has a very European feel. I guess the challenge for people is working through French, right? A lot of jobs require you to have a specific standard of French. You can survive without French there, but it's very popular, obviously, for people immigrating from, say, North Africa or former French colonies where French is an official language, right? Because it's a lot easier for people coming from those locations.
And if you could go back 15 years ago, what would you have done differently? Or would you have chosen Vancouver? Would you have chosen a different field to begin your journey in Canada?
I think when I arrived here, I was in finance, but I didn't know what else to do. And that's probably the career advice I give people, as in, everyone says I need to make a change, but you kind of got to put the hard yards into figuring out what you want to do or trying the little steps. So for me, I was like, okay, here's a job in finance in Vancouver, I'll take it. Incidentally, it took me 3.5 years to get out of finance, or it took me 3.5 years to start my idea, and then maybe 4.5 to get out. So people can be quite impatient nowadays, and you got to realize that big changes require big effort and lots of work, because you talk about, the challenges people have. My challenge was I needed to do a lot of soul searching and realize, okay, the one thing I learned is that I don't see myself being in this office or in this environment long term. Ireland bailed out the banks, so I became very kind of annoyed at the financial system, because I realized the banks were bailed out at the cost of the people, and that created a lot of hardship in Ireland. And I think there was a lot of hardship all over the world because of the global financial crisis, right? The society paid for the mistakes of the top 1%, right? So after some soul searching, I realized, okay, until I find that idea, I need to upskill. So I think what I focused on really was I learned, or I observed that I needed to kind of learn how sales works, understand the process of sales, because any idea you have to sell, or sales is communication. I think I touched on the kind of software learning and, just understanding websites. I just thought that would create a lot of options for me. And then it was a lot of reading, a lot of kind of exploring different careers and thinking, could I do this, or could I see myself doing that? And that's tough. A lot of people can talk about being unhappy, but then they can't talk about, well, what am I doing to solve it? What positive things are you doing to create that optionality? And I always dreamed of being an entrepreneur, but I never had the idea. And without the idea, you can just get impatient, or you can keep upskilling until you'll eventually find the idea. And the idea came through just being in Canada. And as I mentioned, observing the problems of my friends, observing the success of other immigrants that I worked with, and just watching people. And then I realized, okay, well, there is a formula for success in Canada. And I felt that the immigration industry, notably lawyers and immigration consultants, the model is they're gatekeepers of information. It's you pay me $200, I will give you the keys of the kingdom, right? It's like basic information. And I know they'll always argue that, oh, well, our clients are people who value their time or want quick answers. But my idea was always, let's democratize this information and make it, open source, or make high quality information available to everyone. Basically allow them, right now we allow people to select an immigration strategy. And the vision always was to build a free platform and allow people to solve their problems, and then see what ideas can evolve from that. And the big idea for us was we created such a large community that then products and services that wanted to help our community came to us. So we see ourselves as kind of curators of the products and services that our community needs, because every immigrant needs a whole host of products and services to make their move a success, right? They need to find a job. They need to figure out how to immigrate. They need health insurance. They need a phone when they arrive. They need a bank account. There's a whole chain, a place to stay. So there's a whole chain of products and services that can benefit the newcomer community. And that was the kind of the eureka moment for me. I knew there was some common good in building that resource, and I knew that if I keep growing it, that I will find business ideas. And that's kind of what came from it. As in, right now we have a lot of different partnerships, and there are products and services that we stand by, and we're proud to introduce to our newcomers.
And what is next for you? Your next dream that you're tackling on?
Before the pandemic, we were working on, I would call moving to Canada, maybe from 4 years ago, I would call it an information website, or a blog style information. So we had excellent articles. We probably had 500 or 600 articles on all these different topics, but there was no priority level, or there was no order. It was kind of like, we're kind of saying, knock yourself out. There's a lot of information here. So before the pandemic, what we started working on was basically wrapping all of that information into a product. And what we mean by that is we'll ask for some key information to help you decide. So, for example, we'll ask a newcomer what your location preference is, your age, your education, your language skills. We can then help them select an immigration program that they may be eligible for. We can then identify the step-by-steps for executing on that. But while they're working on this, then we can actually help them, plan their location. We can identify all the settlement things that they need to be pondering on. So it's essentially a digital project management tool. So we create a series of personalized checklists that are customized for each person's circumstances. And the bigger picture for that is just using technology to scale the resources to more people.
So is this an app that you are developing, or did you already launch it?
It is developed. So right now it's I guess it's a web app. It's not like an iPhone application or Android application right now.
So on the website they can log in and get access to all that.
Basically you create a profile, and then you can actually access a personalized checklist, and that will guide you through all of the steps. So it'll tell you the first few steps in every program to get started. And that's the hardest part with any journey, even every entrepreneur journey. The first few steps are the hardest. So what we try and do is combine 10 years of knowledge and just guide people on these are the things you need to look out for. And then each task is linked to an article, or it's linked to a video that we've created. You can add the task to your calendar to actually create accountability. You can create notes on your dashboard. Eventually, we'll gamify that as well. So, having the ability for newcomers to connect to other newcomers, or to, collect points, or rewarding them in certain behaviors and stuff like that. And what that does for us as a business is it allows us to create a better understanding of where people are at in the journey and where the obstacles are. And then we can study and we can realize, okay, people are getting caught up here. So we need to build better support articles, or we need to build an information graphic. So we get a lot of feedback from our community, and then we're always trying to empower them to get through all of the obstacles in their way.
And for anybody who wants to utilize any of your services, where do you suggest that they go and look for that information?
Sure, they can go to, it's www.moving2canada.com. And you can create a free profile, and that's probably the best way to get started. There's a lot of e-learning journeys they can access. There's a getting started guide, and then we can create those personalized checklists. Right now they're available for all of the Express Entry programs and the International Experience Canada program. We plan to expand that over the next few years to include programs such as provincial nominee programs, family class. We'll continue to expand it, right? There's over 80 different immigration programs. Right now, we're just trying to cover the most common ones, and we'll eventually add more and more functionality to support our audience.
What kind of people are you hoping to meet in the next, say, 2 or 3 years that would help you on your mission to provide these services to newcomers in Canada?
We're pivoting, I guess, we call ourselves a technology startup now. So I guess technology people that share the mission of helping newcomers. A lot of our team are newcomers themselves, or at least have a passion for helping newcomers. So we really hope to, right now, we have 2 federal innovation funds supporting our product. And we really hope to kind of scale that to more and more newcomers, as we really feel it's a service that can benefit people.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you so much for dropping by today. I'm glad it finally worked out.
My pleasure.
With your schedule and mine. Thank you. And thank you for listening or for watching this episode. If you are watching it on YouTube, please remember to like, to subscribe to our channel as well, and to share this episode with whoever you think might see some value from it. Thank you so much, and I'll see you on the next episode.